This week we're going to be looking at Mere Christianity's chapter on Christian marriage. Now I find this to be my favorite chapter in this entire book. I don't know which one you find to be the most enjoyable, but this is just an excellent chapter, and it's really deep. Because of that, we're actually going to divide into three parts. We're going to look this week at issues of Christian marriage, of remaining married, falling in love, falling out of love. Next week we're going to talk about divorce, remarriage, and social justice as a result, or how we contend against divorce in our society, whether or not we should. And so we're going to talk about that. I know that's going to be a good controversial topic. And then the third week, we're going to talk about the husband as the head of the marriage union. So really look forward to that one as well. But this week, as I said, we're just going to talk about Christian marriage, love, falling in and out of love, and what that looks like, what that means for Christian marriage. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday. I have traditionally recorded it on Thursday or Friday, but due to scheduling restraints later in this week for myself, I'm not going to be able to do that. In fact, I'm talking about Christian marriage here, but I'm actually going to be going out of town and unavailable on Friday. In the first half of Saturday, we are going to be out of town celebrating our 10th anniversary. So look forward to that. And so this is a neat topic to be discussing this week of my anniversary. With that, I just have 4 prompts for today's discussion. The first was Jesus expressing a sentiment or describing a fact when he described the married couple as one flesh? So when Jesus describes the married couple as one flesh, he is describing a fact. It is a fact of marriage that those who enter into a Christian marriage, into this holy unity, this holy union, that they are doing so to become one flesh. The Lord creates a unique bond between husband and wife. Now, I described this in part on Sunday when I preached on sexual morality, because I talked about how God has so wired our brains that chemicals create a bond in our brains between us and our spouse upon engaging in sexual intimacy. And that's a beautiful thing. God creates within us a desire for our spouse, and that bond is blessed. It's a wonderful thing. And it's one that seeks satisfaction only in our spouse. And so people have tried to delude that, as they can with all bonds. We are reminded that a bond is as strong as we are willing to contend for it. We can delude a bond by practicing things that discourage the healthy creation and strengthening of that bond. But when we submit to one another in reverence of Christ and humility, out of a desire to worship Jesus Christ and to show love and respect for our spouse, when we do that, that bond is strengthened, and that's a beautiful picture. So I want to encourage that. Jesus encouraged that. He described the husband and wife as one flesh. Second, how does Lewis relate the marriage covenant with justice? Now, justice is not a topic that we often think of when it comes to the topic of marriage. It just doesn't strike us as kind of that sort of topic. Now, we're going to talk about social justice as it relates to divorce next week, and that's going to be an interesting topic. But here he's talking about justice in the way of fairness, so what it means to be fair, what it means to be honest in all areas. And he talks about how sometimes people enter into the marriage covenant dishonestly. So they go into that with the intent of receiving the affirmation of society, the adoration of society, because they're a married couple. They've taken that next step together without really committing themselves to the responsibilities that we find within Christian marriage. And that invites all kinds of harm. He talks about how sometimes people go into the marriage covenant, perhaps, if they're not serious about it, disobeying God, lying even to God. That's the way that Lewis frames it. Lying to themselves, which is not very wise, or even lying to their spouse or to their in-laws, and that is treacherous. It's important that somebody enters into the marriage covenant for the right reasons. And that's one of the reasons that people go through premarital counseling, is because we seek to identify whether somebody has a proper understanding of what it means to love their spouse. Is it just emotion driven? Is it about desiring the very best for their spouse? Is it about wanting to grow in holiness and recognizing that God has so uniquely gifted and called their spouse that together they can encourage the holiness of the other, and they can be a beautiful picture of the love of Christ and the unity of the Trinity, and so they can convey the truth about God to a fallen world through their love and their commitment to one another? Is that why they go into marriage? Or is it just because of the physical intimacy, because they're burning with passion, and so they just want to be able to enjoy the sexual aspects of that without committing to the other holy aspects of that? In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul, in response to a question, did say that if one is burning with lust, that being married was a good thing, but he wasn't offering a low view of marriage. He wasn't saying that's the only reason to be married. He was expressing that within the framework that people desire to worship Jesus Christ. They desire to remain pure. They desire to worship Him and to be His light into the world, that they desire to do that. And so they were concerned about sexual morality as well. So that would be a perfectly fine thing. Are people going into marriage with the desire to get something out of it? Are they trying to perhaps lie to the government about citizenship? That might be an idea there, or trying to inherit something. We, in our culture, we talk about gold diggers, about people who marry somebody far older than them. Not that people can't be in love who marry that way, but these people marry with the specific intent of material gain, with the assumption that the person they have married will not be along very long, so they are really investing into a relationship financially, hoping that they'll be able to cash in sooner rather than later. Now, we would recognize that those are poor motivations for entering into the marriage covenant. And if somebody told you, well, I just really want to marry you because I really want to get the house you live in, that's awesome. That should not really sit right with us. That should be a huge warning sign for us. Somebody should know us fully and love us and want to commit to us out of reverence for Christ as we submit to one another as we enter into the marriage covenant. Those should be the driving motivations. And so Lewis relates the marriage covenant with justice, saying there that people ought to enter into marriage with clear communication, out of the right reasons, with that right motivation, and that right motivation being to glorify God in humble service to one another, wanting to encourage holiness and enjoyment throughout life with one another. Now, as people enter into marriage, one might think that being in love is the dominant requirement for entering into marriage, and obviously being in love is a beautiful thing, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And so it remains the standard for staying in love, as staying in marriage. So as long as you're in love, you remain married. But the minute that you fall out of love, you are free to exit the marriage because it no longer satisfies what it was supposed to satisfy in the first place. You're supposed to feel in love. You're supposed to have these warm, fuzzy feelings each and every day about your spouse. You're supposed to look at your spouse every day and go, wow, how wonderful. I just can't believe how incredibly blessed I am each and every day. Is that realistic? Is that how, even those who are watching this who may have been married for 50, 60 years, is that how you felt each and every day, day in, day out? Well, let's talk about that for a moment. First, about marriage and entering into marriage. And he says, what we call being in love is a glorious state, and in several good ways, good for us. It helps to make us generous and courageous. It opens our eyes not only to the beauty of the beloved, but to all beauty and its subordinates. Our merely animal sexuality, in that sense, love is the great conqueror of lust. No one in his senses would deny that being in love is far better than either common sensuality or cold self-centeredness. But as I said before, the most dangerous thing you can do is to take on any one impulse of our own nature and set it up as the thing you ought to follow at all costs. Being in love is a good thing, but it is not the best thing. There are many things below it, but there are also things above it. You cannot make it the basis of your whole life. It is a noble feeling, but it is still a feeling. So he describes this fact that knowledge can last, principles can last, habits can last, but feelings come and go. So first off, he describes being in love there as a wonderful thing. It really does refine our character. I trust that when you met your spouse, there were things about yourself that you did not recognize to be an error. There were things about yourself, characteristics, character traits that you had that you didn't realize that you needed to approve. Perhaps you lived by yourself or you lived with parents, and so you did things the way that they pleased, and you never came to realize some areas of your heart that were stubborn, that were selfish. And when you were married, you had to confront those issues. You had to recognize what it meant to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, as we're commanded to do in Ephesians chapter 5. And so we find this principle even conveyed in mainstream society. In movies and television, we find these cold-hearted people, and then they fall in love, and pretty soon that frosty exterior starts to melt, and the sincerity of their heart, the warmth of their character shines through. That's like the basis of all these sort of cheesy movies in our society. I mean, even in cartoons, the Beauty and the Beast, that is conveyed, isn't it? And so, yeah, we recognize the reality. God has so created love that and the emotional feeling of love that it does compel us to change. It compels us to examine ourselves in the mirror and to ask, am I committed to being the sort of person that can meet the needs of my spouse? It should. And so as we go through the seasons of life, of course, those needs change, our responsibilities change, and we need to change with them. We don't say, well, you've changed and I'm not happy being with you anymore because you're not the person you were 20 years ago or 50 years ago. Well, you've changed too. Your responsibilities have changed. Your season of life has changed. It's supposed to. So have you matured? Have you grown? And as you have grown, are you seeking to satisfy your spouse, to humbly serve your spouse, to help them grow in holiness? Are you doing that? Love should compel us to do that, as well as the emotional aspect of love. And I want to separate those two. But is being in love the only reason for married couples to remain in love? And absolutely not. Lewis says this: the idea that being in love is the only reason for remaining married really leaves no room for marriage as a contract or promise at all. If love is the whole thing, then the promise can add nothing. And if it adds nothing, then it should not be made. The curious thing is that lovers themselves, while they remain really in love, know this better than most who talk about love. As Chesterton pointed out, those who are in love have a natural inclination to bind themselves by promises. Love songs all over the world are full of vows of eternal constancy. The Christian law is not forcing upon the passion of love something which is foreign to that passion's own nature. It is demanding that lovers should take seriously something which their passion of itself impels them to do. And of course, the promise made when I am in love, and because I am in love, to be true to the beloved as long as I live, commits one to being true even if I cease to be in love. A promise must be about things that I can do, about actions. No one can promise to go on feeling in a certain way. He might as well promise never to have a headache or always to feel hungry. But what, it may be asked, is the use of keeping two people together if they are no longer in love? There are several sound social reasons: to provide a home for their children, to protect the woman, who has probably sacrificed or damaged her own career by getting married, from being dropped whenever a man is tired of her. But there is also another reason of which I am very sure, though I find it a little hard to explain. And what he means there is what I expressed here, what I read. What we call being in love is a glorious state, and in several ways good for us. It helps to make us generous and courageous. It opens our eyes not only to the beauty of the beloved, but to all beauty. So as we remain married and as we commit ourselves to our spouse, we recognize that even in those seasons in which we might not be as emotionally overwhelmed as we are at others, we might not be in that honeymoon state or that state of constant euphoria. That's okay. We enter into a deeper sort of love. We know our spouse. They know us in a deep way and choose to remain committed to us, continue to seek to serve us, and we continue to seek to serve them. And so in that way, we are shaped by our spouse. We grow in holiness. We ask each day, how can I submit my feelings to the promise that I have sworn myself to? How can I commit myself to those faithful works for which Jesus Christ has called me to walk in faithfulness? And so in that way, marriage refines our character and it makes us more like Jesus Christ. We submit to Him. We submit to our spouse. We submit to our lusts and passions. We hand those over to our spouse, to our selfishness. We lay those at the feet of Christ. And we ask, how can I remain faithful and true? How can I build my spouse up and encourage her? Or if you're a she, to encourage him in Christian holiness. And we'll find that those seasons, emotions come and go. We can't promise to feel a certain way at any point. But we find that when we commit ourselves to those things, that we find a satisfaction that no honeymoon state can ever produce. as the months of marriage turn into years, and now years turn into decades, you find a richer type of love and the type of feelings that you have. As you look back at your life and the things you've accomplished together, you feel a real satisfaction. And as you go through life, you shouldn't be seeking, well, I need to move on and find something new. You should be asking, what are the new doors that are opened for us as a couple because we've remained together? Now that we've been together perhaps 10, 20, 40 years, the new season of life that we're in, I think it's so precious to see couples that have remained together minister to their children effectively because they are together. They're able to celebrate holidays together. Their children are running to all these different places on holidays. They can come together as a family. They're able to partner together in encouraging the upbringing of grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. What is the seasons that are open for you together as a couple as you move forward together, as you grow in holiness? Those are the things that Jesus wants for us to find satisfaction in. And finally today, what definition does Lewis provide for love, and when can this be lived out? I use this quote in every single marriage, in every single wedding I officiate. I always have, always will, and I make no apology for that. He says, love, in the second sense, love as distinct from being in love is not merely a feeling, and this is the definition. It is a deep unity, maintained by the will and deliberately strengthened by habit, reinforced by the grace with which both partners ask and receive from God. This is Christian marriage in its sum. It is a deep unity. It is the husband and wife becoming one flesh. And that is the result of the gracious work of God as He's created that sort of unity, as He encourages it. Now, it is reinforced. You have to make decisions each day to submit yourself in reverence to Christ, in reverence to your spouse, to humbly serve him or her, to humbly meet his or her needs, to show love and adoration, season in and season out. And it is dependent on the grace which God supplies. In our flesh, we recognize our weakness. That if a healthy marriage was just a result of us and our strength, we recognize that in our flesh we are very weak. We can even fall short. We've all said things that have hurt our spouse. We've seen the ugliness of decisions we've made and hurt that we've brought to ourselves and in our selfishness and our pride, whatever it might be. But in Christ Jesus, we forgive one another. We find the strength to forgive one another. We find the strength to find forgiveness and to find peace as we work together. We find ourselves growing in holiness together. And so we find real joy and real satisfaction. And so we know the result of a Christian marriage is spiritual fruit that echoes in eternity to come. So those are the real joys. And then I asked, when can this be lived out? And the answer is in any and every season. It doesn't matter what circumstance comes if people have this perspective of love. And I'm just going to share this as I move towards concluding. When I talk to couples who face a very difficult obstacle, such as cancer, that's the first one that comes to my mind. But as couples enter into a difficulty like that, I always tell couples this: whatever is true about your marriage is going to be revealed through this situation. Not that you can't strengthen your marriage, but we find often that as the couples who go into a crisis, who have not worked on their marriage, who have not had this pattern of seeking reinforcements, of committing themselves day in, day out to living for Christ and to meet the needs and the desires of their spouse through their dependence on God, that if that's the case, that their marriage falls apart very quickly because the obstacle presents itself and they haven't created habits that are able to be sustained in the midst of difficulty. You can fake marriage in the honeymoon state. You can fake marriage when everything's going good. You can't fake it when things are tough, when things are challenging, when your spouse or you has sinned against the other, when there's real conflict, financial hurt, or when there's physical illness. You can't fake it then. But I tell couples on the other side of the spectrum, if you have committed yourselves to that habit and you live for Christ and you love the Lord, then then even as you go through difficulty, you'll find that you're actually come out stronger, because there's urgency, even there's clarity in the midst of difficulty, and the habits that you've already worked on, they produce something even more special. And so even couples who go through that difficulty, even if a couple is lost, even if a spouse is lost, what we find is that the love that they have for one another, and perhaps the surviving spouse, is such a rich, beautiful expression of Christian love that it's really hard to even put words to. So I want to encourage you, as you think about what it means to be in love, as you think about what Christian marriage should be, today is an opportunity to commit yourself to submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, showing love and affection as an extension of the promise that you made before a congregation, before God, before your spouse, that you would walk in holiness and faithfulness each and every day, that you'd prepare yourself to make this a habit each and every day. And I want to encourage you that if you do that, then even if difficult days should come, and they will inevitably, that you're going to be able to stand the test of time, because God is with you, and He's the one He's the one whom you are dependent upon. Well, may the Lord bless you today. God bless.